Bismillah. So what I wanted to do is before we bring Asma on is just talk to you a little bit about what Healing Together is. And it's really a grassroots network, a support system that came about quite organically. There was no intention to have an organization or any effort of this nature. It just started when our founder, Amira, she experienced back to back the passing away of a few loved ones, and she just thought it was a good idea to just gather a couple of people and just talk about the experience of grieving, just so we can learn from one another. And we know there's power in community. So I was there at that first session, and it was really powerful. For myself, I had lost a parent like 8 9 years prior to that, but even just sitting there in that session, it was just so cathartic just to listen to the stories, to be able to share whatever I could share with everyone in case it was helpful for them. So what ended up happening was myself and some of the other participants were like, you need to do this again. There's so much benefit in this. And so she did it again, more requests again. And it turned into a once a month event, either in person or online. And it's just like a safe, secure space where you can just share, learn from one another. And I'll definitely talk more about Healing Together towards the end of the session, but that's how we got started. And what we decided to do was, so the online and the in-person sessions do continue, but we wanted to have a series of webinars for us to even learn as a group from speakers, people who are a lot more knowledgeable and have just more experience with, the mourning, the grieving, and the healing process coming out on the other end. I wanted to share something I thought was interesting. So, as most of you know, Asma Hussain, she's an author and entrepreneur. I do have her books here, but I found something so interesting in her book, A Place of Refuge, where she actually talks about this notion of how people who are grieving gather together. It's on page 68, and I'll just read an excerpt. We connect with people who have gone through similar struggles. We see something in them, some light, some hope, some flicker of patience that we want for ourselves. We gravitate towards one another, pulled close by an invisible but powerful connection. And I think that's kind of why we're all here, is there's something, this invisible pull, this connection you feel to others who are grieving as well. And you know that they're in the same headspace, the same heart space. And I mean, obviously, this is Allah bringing us together, but I'm hoping that this gravitational pull that brought us together here, inshallah, will be of benefit for all of us. So I'll just give a quick intro about Asma Hussain. So as most of us know, I mentioned she's an author, she's an entrepreneur, she's a mother to a 11-year-old daughter. She is most well known for her book, and I have it right here, A Temporary Gift. It was published in 2015, and it's a temporary gift. It's reflections on love, loss, and healing. And she wrote it as a memoir after her husband, Amr, may Allah have mercy on his soul, he passed away in 2013. And in this memoir, she details how she just grapples and she was wrestling with, the ideas of faith and patience. And it was really healing for myself to read as well. So she did that in 2015, and then 2015, she also started a publishing company, Ruqaya's Bookshelf, which focuses on producing books with really strong Muslim characters. She lives in Toronto with her daughter Ruqaya, and with further ado, let's invite Asma on. Okay, there we go. Assalamu alaikum, Asma. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for making the time to chat with us today. I know you probably have a gazillion things going on, but we really, really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's my
Yeah,
pleasure.
how was your morning?
Busy, actually.
Busy, yeah.
Got out of one meeting to come into this, so.
Okay, it would be a surprise if it wasn't, but alhamdulillah, we really appreciate the time. Before I get started, I did mention to Asma, I do like having drinks while being on, so I wanted to present My drink. Yes. Asma, what do you have over there?
I mean, it's not that exciting. It's mint tea.
Anything that's helpful in healing. Like for me, I'm not a coffee person, but today, well, okay, as an aside, I'm trying to get away from genocide coffee. So um, I have my homemade coffee with a hint of hazelnut and oat milk, um, just to keep me grounded, something soothing as we, do a deep dive. So, Asma, I think a lot of us who are familiar with your work, we really appreciate the raw, authentic voice with which you share your feelings, and it really resonates with those of us who've experienced the passing of a loved one and um, just in the grieving process. Before we get to talk about the writing, I was hoping maybe in your own words you could just briefly share what happened? Where did this grief journey start in 2015? What happened for you?
So in 2013, in
Sorry,
2013,
I'm so sorry.
no, no, it's
2013.
okay because the book came out in 2015.
Right.
Um, so in 2013, my husband Amr and I were living in Toronto, and we went back for the summer to visit his family because I had had a baby, Ruqaya's bookshelf. And her grandparents from her dad's side had not yet met her. So we said, let's go to Egypt, let's visit. So while we were there, and I don't know who in this audience remembers that time, it was kind of the tail end of the Arab Spring, and there's just a lot of chaos happening in Egypt, and then which eventually led to the coup, the military coup. So once that happened, there was a lot of violence that broke out in massive protests. And for those who remember, there was one day, August 14th, 2013, when over 1,000 people were killed in a protest in Egypt in the Rabbi Massacre.
Mhm.
And those numbers are actually probably not accurate, but they are the recorded numbers according to Human Rights Watch. So might be actually much more than that.
Yes.
So that was on the Wednesday, and then on the Friday, my husband went out to a protest in Alexandria. So Rabbi Massacre happened in Cairo.
Okay.
We lived in Alexandria.
Okay.
So he went out to a protest, and how protests usually work is men on Fridays, they'll go for Jama, and then after Jama's done, they'll get together and they will march in the street. And so that's what he did. And I had called him at some point because I was scared. I was nervous because of what happened just 2 days ago, and we were seeing images all over the internet, not on the news, obviously, right? But on the internet, people were sharing. Um, and I called him and I said, I was worried about him. He's like, don't worry, there's like thousands of people here. There's thousands of people here, men, women, children. It's like it's a family affair, right?
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And then probably about 20 minutes later, I got a call from his phone, but it was someone else. And at first,
Mhm.
like, in the chaos, I didn't understand what the person was saying. So I handed the phone to my mother-in-law who was there. And just from the expression on her face, I knew what had happened, right? Um, and so what happened is that as well as about 40 to 45 other people that day were shot and killed at the protest by the Egyptian military. Um, and it's very difficult for me to describe that day almost because part of me has erased it from my memory. And it's kind of it's a bit of a blessing, to be honest with you, when your mind kind of makes the past a little bit blurry so that you're not having to relive it every single day, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but that for me was such a shock to the system, right? So and there are many different layers that I think about right now. I mean, years later, now that I can actually think about it clearly, it's losing someone you love dearly, but also in a very violent and traumatic way, away from your home and your family. Um, and then there's another layer of how you now see the world, and the lens which you wear, right? So whatever it is, whatever hope I had or positivity or optimism about humanity was really affected by that.
Mhm.
And subhanAllah, like Sorry, I'm giving a very long intro. I hope that's okay.
No,
Uh,
this is good. This is good.
so I was just thinking about this the other day. The verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, um, those who kill one person, it's as if they kill all of mankind. And if you save one person, it's as if you save all of mankind. I remember I used to read that verse all the time, and we used to hear it all the time,
Yeah.
right? In khutbahs and I remember after Am passed away, um, it took on a completely different meaning to me. And I find it like, and I think about that till now, right? That when I come across that verse, when someone you love is killed,
Mm,
it's as if your entire mankind has been killed. So your 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 vision of what mankind means is done. If the person you love the most was killed, like who else matters? What else matters? And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a healthy place to continue existing in,
yeah.
but in that moment, that's what it feels like. It feels like,
Yeah.
what's the point of anything, right?
Yeah.
Like my mankind as a concept is
Mm,
dead, And I've been thinking a lot about that verse in relation to what's happening in Palestine as well. That and I've so many videos we've been watching of I don't have to describe it here.
of
Everybody
course.
knows. But I think about them and people who have lost their family members. It's not just one or two people that have been lost to a person. It's mankind has been lost to that person. So I often think like how many mankind's have been actually lost in Palestine right now? Like the version of the world just completely changes in your eyes. Um, but yeah, subhanAllah. So after that, I was able to come back to Canada and I started writing. I actually started writing before I came back. I came back a week later.
Right.
I think I wrote like the same night that he passed away. I wrote, you know, I wrote, I actually wrote a Facebook note. Facebook notes don't exist anymore, but if you search the title
Yeah.
of the Facebook note on Facebook, you'll find it, even
Yeah.
though notes.
I
So
remember it. Yeah.
yeah, the title is Teaching Myself Not to Lose Hope. So if you guys want to search it on Facebook, you'll find it.
Yeah.
And the reason I wrote that actually is because I was getting hundreds of messages and I couldn't respond to them. And so I wrote this note and I just said, here, this is what happened. Like, leave me alone. I mean, no, that doesn't sound nice, but it was just like I can't address everybody. So this is what I have to say. And then that note ended up like being shared so many times, and so many people around the world messaged me, and that was kind of the start of my writing journey when it comes
Mhm.
to this particular book and these books
Yeah.
and these topics in general. So it literally started the same night, actually.
Mhm. Same night.
Yeah.
So, as you were speaking, I was like quickly scribbling down things here that I want to like dig in deeper with you. There's so much like the layers, and I love what you just shared about like you really, if you lose that one person that's so close to you, it's really like you've lost all of mankind. Like you said, what does the rest of the world matter in that moment or those early days, right? Like totally, subhanAllah. I'll definitely dig into that a little bit more, but I think with this writing piece, I had actually heard this actually in one of your other interviews where you were talking about how you were compelled to write. It's like the grief was making you write. And I'm just thinking to myself, and it, especially early days, it's so hard to even function. And mashallah, you were like a new mom at the time. They were in a different country, move, like just so much going on. But you wrote. Why writing? What was it doing for you?
So just for context, I've always been a writer.
Yeah.
I've always used writing to process. So
Mm,
even before, ever since I was a teenager, actually, and I used to have a blog, and there was a lot of stuff going on. I used to write a lot. Um, Writing was just the way in which I processed my emotions. And in that moment, it felt unbearable to not process my emotions.
So it's
It
about the
felt
processing.
unbearable to keep everything here in my chest
Hmm.
and not be able to let it out. So it's less about so it was about sharing with people because I was getting
Hmm.
just an inundation of messages that I just could not respond to. Um, but it was more than that, right? It
Yeah.
was, and I don't know if other people feel this in the group, but grief has a way, and I don't even know if it was grief at that time, if it had time to become grief, right? It was
Mm.
still just shock, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes it feels like you're filling up, and if you don't have a drain, right? Just I don't know what other metaphor to use to let some of that out, it feels like it's going to come up here and choke you. Like sometimes physically feels heavy and painful in your body, in your chest. And for me, I think that was one of the biggest reasons for years, actually, not just in that one moment, for
Hmm.
years, that when things build up in me, it feels like I physically can't let them go until they come out in some way or another. So for me, it's writing. For other people, it will be other things.
Yeah.
It would be physical activity. It will be conversations. Like it can take on many different forms. But
Hmm.
for me, it the reason I say I was compelled is because if I didn't do it, I felt like I was going to drown, like in my own self.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You were leaning into what helped you process and the thing that had always throughout your life helped you process. So just
Exactly.
leaning into that. And that makes perfect sense, even when I think to my experience as well. It's just you lean into those things that work,
Yeah.
right?
I think the trouble is when you're in
Yeah.
a position where
Mhm.
you don't know what works,
Yeah.
right? And so I almost consider myself lucky that I had writing, you know,
Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
don't know where I would have ended up if I didn't have that. If I didn't have something to help
Hmm.
me in that moment and in all the moments that came afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think people definitely need to discover what that thing is for them that actually gives
Yeah.
them, even if it's momentary relief.
Yeah. Yeah. And writing and sharing is something that we saw publicly, but were there other things that you tried and you were leaning into that, I mean, that we're not aware of that actually were also giving you momentary relief, like things that you would suggest?
So I, the funny thing is there are other things, but I've written them out. They're in the book actually.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
whoever wants
that's fair.
whoever wants to grab the book, wink, wink. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
So reading the Quran, like
Okay.
I got to a point where like I just every day was spending like a good chunk of time just reading, 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 reading. Just because, you know, like when you read the Quran and you try to understand the meanings, right? You read about prophets and messengers and righteous people who have gone through things that
Mhm.
very intense, far more intense than what you've gone through, right? Or what I've gone through,
Yeah.
and how they had patience and overcame, and the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like all of these things are things that I had to repeat to myself over and over and over so that they could kind of move from my tongue into my heart,
Yeah.
right? So I don't take faith lightly or for granted because it's very easy to speak about faith.
Mhm.
It's very easy to say to somebody, be patient. It's very easy to
Yeah.
say things with your tongue, but to
Yeah.
actually have them in your heart and believe them, they're
Yeah.
two different things. They're two different things. And so if
Yeah.
I wasn't in a constant state of reminding myself and remembering and making dua and praying and doing all of the things that we're asked to do, right? And that we know have rest for the heart, right? That
Mhm.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, right? In the remembrance of Allah, there's rest, and in the Quran, there's healing for what's in the chest. Um, if I wasn't consistently doing those things, my fear was that I would lose what was in here in my chest, and it would all become just something that's
Right.
on the tongue.
Yeah.
That to me was like that was terrifying to me, that
Yeah.
thought, for many reasons. And one of them might sound silly, but
Mhm.
like one of them was like, imagine I went through this intense pain
Mhm.
and I didn't take something from it to fortify my faith, then what was the point of that thing happening?
Yeah.
And that thing happening was just simply pain with nothing else, nothing, nothing more to gather from it, nothing more to learn from it. And I refuse to live in that world, right?
Yeah.
That I live in a world where everything happens at the predestined time in the
Mhm.
way that Allah meant it to happen and for a reason, even if we don't know that reason, even if
Yeah.
we don't know it now and we learn it 5 years from now, or we never know that reason and we
Yeah.
only learn in the hereafter, perhaps.
Yeah.
Uh, so I was in a state where, alhamdulillah, I
Mhm.
feel like I was way better back then than I am now. But I mean, at consistency,
Right.
like to just be in a constant state of remembering Allah, because
Right.
I felt like that was one of the only things that actually brought moments of peace and rest to me. Uh,
Mhm.
Nothing else really would, even in that first year, like I refused to numb myself, um, which in retrospect, I'm not 100% sure was necessarily a good idea, right? But
Mm.
I'm just describing what
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't watch any TV, didn't, didn't really scroll social media except to kind of write, write and share. Didn't watch YouTube, like just didn't engage in
Right.
any kind of entertainment. Um, because I felt, first of all, when something like this happens to you, you're like, what is the point of everything? And it feels so shallow and weird
Mhm.
to engage in what you used to engage in before. Like it fundamentally changes you.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yeah, I say that I don't know if it was a good idea or not because now I believe in moderation, right? I don't
Yeah.
believe you need to
Sure.
cut yourself off and become
Yeah.
like a hermit or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you should be able to exist in a way that is moderate.
Right.
But yeah,
But that was not your experience.
no, it was not my experience. Uh,
Right.
but honestly, like,
Okay.
alhamdulillah, that space though,
Mhm.
so my mind wasn't engaged in that. And so my
Yeah.
mind could be fully engaged in everything else, right?
Yeah.
So not just raising my daughter, but also what I was reading in the Quran,
Mm.
what I was writing, what I was trying to express. It wasn't polluted by anything else, anything around me. You know,
I do. And thinking two parallel thoughts at the same time. I want to dig into that part where you're talking about the mind and the heart connect and how you can know something in your mind, but the heart isn't there yet, right? Like sometimes, and we believe, things, especially things where we're like, okay, there is wisdom in this, there is goodness in this, and you're like a mantra, you repeat it to yourself again and again, but your heart isn't there yet. Or like what you said earlier, like you didn't want to get to a point where you lost what was in the heart, right? And it's hard when you're in that space where you just are like, okay, I know, I know, I know, but the heart is like, yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know. And just like that bridge there, when you have to get from here to there, it's a very confusing experience at a spiritual level. It can be very confusing. And I wonder, like, when I think back, I'm like, I don't know how I did it. Like, do we just fake it till we make it? Like, you do the rituals, you just keep doing the rituals, believing that the heart will understand. Um, or is it like, I don't know, any other insights you've heard from other people or why you've been digging deep into grieving?
so this is my personal opinion. I'm
Yeah.
sure. I just want to clarify that everything I say is my personal opinion. Okay.
Yes.
I just
Okay.
always have to say that because
Disclaimer.
yeah, disclaimer, personal opinion.
Yeah.
Do you have to fake it till you make it? Kind of.
Yeah.
Sometimes. So sometimes Allah does bless you with having that yaqeen, like that certainty.
Hmm.
Other times you're really struggling and you need to
Yeah.
just keep doing the actions and keep saying the words until they absorb into your heart, right?
Yeah.
And you know what I think of when
Yeah.
you ask this question. when the Prophet ﷺ lost his
Awesome.
son, Ibrahim, and that famous
Yeah.
statement that he said, the
Yeah.
eyes shed tears and the heart is grieved, but the tongue doesn't
Mm.
say anything that's displeasing to Allah. So, like, you will feel a kind of grief in your heart. And you know how I described it before, like your body's filling up and it feels like you're going to drown. Like, the feelings are very physical, right? And
Yeah.
it's very physical, very intense. But the only thing that you're responsible for is what you say and do. You're not responsible for policing your feelings. You're not
Yeah.
responsible for saying, okay, my heart cannot feel sad because X number of days have passed, or X number of years have passed, therefore I shouldn't be able to grieve this person anymore. You don't have control over your heart, but you have control
Yeah.
over your hands and you have control over your tongue. And that's
Yeah.
all we're asked. That's all we're asked to control, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is it that we're not punished for, evil thoughts? We're not taken to account for um like if we intend to do something bad, but we don't do it, we actually
Mm.
get a good deed. Like,
Yeah.
but even that bad intention, we're not punished for that. What's happening in here is very difficult to control.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happening here in your hands and your tongue, I shouldn't say easy to control, but easier to control than
Yeah.
what's the big mess that's happening in here, right? So it's not. I don't fake it till you make it sound so gross,
I
but
know.
yeah, but it is kind of like that,
It's
even
repetitive and you just,
yeah, even if you feel like absolute chaos
yeah.
inside,
Yeah.
but you're not saying anything that's displeasing to Allah.
Mm.
Like all of that pain that's happening inside, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rewarding you and expiating your sins, right? All of that
Yeah.
internal pain, that sadness. So this idea that, oh,
Mm.
I can't be sad, like we're trying to, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work to try to control the heart, just
Yeah.
control the tongue and the hands. And if you're doing that for the sake of Allah,
Yeah.
why wouldn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring that into your heart? Like Allah's more merciful than that. It's not that you're faking. You're doing it knowing
Knowing.
that, inshallah, I mean, by the will of Allah, He's going to bring those beliefs and those actions into your heart and make you firm on those
Yeah.
beliefs.
Jazakallah khair. I really love what you said about the heart and not trying to control it because um, even in conversations I've had with people who've lost someone, and I, in a way, related to myself as well, there were periods and times where there's almost this spiritual guilt because you think to yourself, you're like, okay, I know Allah wouldn't place a burden on me greater than I have the ability to bear. But some moments are unbearable. Like some days you just cannot get through your day. And then you wonder, you're like, why am I not more patient? Why am I not being patient? And then there's this guilt that I'm not patient enough. I'm not that accepting of, Allah's decree. And there's like this guilt that just kind of almost, I guess, eats you up alive if you it's such a like it's a mess. I don't even it's just I
Mhm.
don't know where the chicken and the egg is here, but
Yeah.
it's like you want to be patient, but sometimes it's just involuntary. You just can't some days. Like
Yeah.
you can't, right?
Mhm.
And in those days, like, man, I must not be one of the patient ones. I failed the test.
I've had many of those days.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie, I still have those days up until now,
yeah,
right? Like, and we can talk about that, how grief kind of follows you over the
yeah,
years. In fact, we can
yeah.
talk about that separately. But you know what I've learned, honestly? I used to be of the mind of that very same mindset. Like if I had a weak moment and maybe I said something that I shouldn't have said. Remember how I was saying control your hands and tongue?
Yeah,
You're gonna there are gonna be times when you can't or when you don't.
yeah,
But
right.
and I did say some things, you know.
Hmm.
Um and I don't know why I'm talking about it as if it's the past. Like we are engaging in this
Hmm.
life, and there are moments where we lose patience, even years later, and
Right.
say things,
Hmm.
right? But you catch yourself, right?
Right.
You catch yourself and
Hmm.
you rescind it, even if you're just
Yeah.
rescind it internally. Um, But subhanAllah, like we are human beings.
Yeah.
That's where I go back to all the time when I have that negative self-talk in my
Mhm.
head that
Yeah.
because it's very tricky.
Mhm.
Allah's never going to forgive me for this. I'm not going to be counted amongst the patients. I'm not grateful. I'm not all of these things. Allah's not going to accept my repentance. All of those thoughts, they're very negative, harmful thoughts, and they're from shaitan.
Yeah.
And they're partially from shaitan, partially perhaps from your own negative self-talk or whatever it may be. Um, but sometimes I come to epiphanies and I call them dumb epiphanies because,
Okay.
because they're actually so dumb because they're so obvious. But like there's just a moment in my life where it actually goes from up here to here. And I'm like, oh my God, but it's so dumb. So I just call them dumb epiphanies, right? So one of my dumb epiphanies, probably like 2 or 3 years ago, was I'm a human being. And it sounds very silly. That's why I call it dumb. But like, why am I holding myself to a standard that Allah doesn't hold me to? Why am I punishing myself in this world and Allah didn't even punish me? And actually Allah says the opposite, that he's going to forgive me. And if you like, and this is why it's so important to actually be so engaged in the faith, right? In the Quran and all, because you're going to be reading that over and over and over, right? That Allah's going to forgive. Um, and we're not better than other humans. We're
No.
not better than Adam and Eve. We're not better than Adam and Hawa when they committed the sin and were expelled from Jannah. Like,
Right.
and it's in my mind because I wrote a post about it recently that like that they had access to the unseen. They saw stuff we did not see.
Yeah.
Like they saw the angels prostrate, or at least Adam saw the angels prostrating, and just imagine you have all of that knowledge of the unseen and you've seen it with your own eyes, but you still sin,
Yeah.
right? And you know that shaitan is coming after you. Like you've seen it, but you still sinned. Why? Because it's a human thing. It's the nature of humans to sin, to lose patience, to like all of the things that we feel so guilty about. It's in our nature that we can't avoid those things all the time. And
Yeah.
the point is when you do those things and when you catch yourself, you make istighfar and you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you the patience that you need, that you feel you don't have, to forgive you and to have mercy on you. And we already know that if we didn't sin, Allah would wipe us out and bring a nation that did sin. So that
Yeah.
they can ask for forgiveness. So we have in our minds these standards that even Allah doesn't have for us. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
ridiculous.
It is like what you said there, like it is so important to recognize that you actually are a human being and you're gonna make those mistakes. And again, it's almost like a cliche, right? Like you are human, I am human, but the acceptance over here that we are these creatures that will make mistakes and then we go to Allah for forgiveness and then He will set our path right. You know what's interesting is that sometimes it's not even just the internal voice that's holding you up to the standard. I'm going to tell you a funny story. I don't know if anyone's mentioned this to you before. So, when I was grieving, your book had already come out by that point, or I think your posts were already out, but you were starting to go viral, right? At that point already. I kid you not. Someone said they're like, why don't you do what Asma did? Because mashallah, like you set the standard up here, right?
Yeah.
But the whole idea, I don't know, but I want to talk this out, right? So sometimes, like, it will be other people that will have ideas of what your grieving should look like
Mm.
or what you should do with this feeling. And it's all well-intentioned. And it's like, channel it like this, channel it like that. And that's, I think, also the part where it's remembering you're human and reminding others that you're human as well. Um, but it's just, I think this is also something interesting to talk about because sometimes we're like, okay, what can we do to help ourselves along this healing journey? I want to hear from you. What are the some of the unhelpful things that people do, what should be on the do not do list to do around people who are grieving.
How much time do you have? It's
Uh,
I literally looked at
Isma
my
opened up her scrolls.
like 211.
We'll
There's
take a few minutes.
there's so many unhelpful things that I've heard over the years. So many. Like,
Any
subhanAllah,
common themes?
one of the very
Yeah,
first things that I
yeah,
heard, I was still in Egypt, and this was
yeah.
probably like max 2 to 3 days
Mm,
after Amr was shot.
yeah,
A lady came and like um people just kind of poured into the house over the
yeah,
next couple of days. That's what people do. It's just expected
mhm,
that you go visit
yeah.
the family. And so this lady came. I don't till now I don't know who she is. She
Mhm,
either a friend of the family, of Arm's family, or
mhm,
a very distant relative on his
mhm,
side. I still don't know. An
mhm,
older woman came and she had a big smile on her face. And she said, "Don't cry and don't be sad because he's in Jannah." And it was just like like just with a grin on her face, right? And the thing is, I didn't disbelieve what she was saying. Like I very much like I consider him a martyr. I consider that he's in Jannah. Like all of those things she was saying, they're not wrong.
mhm.
But this idea that like because the end was good, then you don't have a right to be sad or to grieve. And to me, that's like just absolutely ridiculous,
Yeah,
right? Like, because Allah created us with a spectrum of emotion, and
yeah,
to deny one part of that spectrum is like you're just shooting yourself in the foot because
yeah,
it's not reality. If you
yeah,
try to shut down the grief and the sadness,
mhm,
it's gonna come up in a different way
yeah,
for human beings, right? That and like if the Prophet ﷺ grieved, right? And he, like, I'll give you an example. He grieved Khadija radiallahu anha, like until he died. He loved her and he mentioned her and he talked about
yeah,
her. He honored her family and her friends. And
mhm,
like it was so present,
yeah,
right? And that doesn't mean he was caught up in grief all the time or anything like that. But and he married and he loved Aisha. Like, but but it's there and it never went away.
yeah,
And was he not patient? Like, how can we say that the Prophet ﷺ wasn't the epitome of patience? And so, why are people asking us, again, holding us to standards that are not even in our faith? And that's what you have to identify when people say certain things to you. Um, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That is my WhatsApp. Sorry. I thought I closed it on my computer. I apologize. So it comes back to holding yourself to a standard of just being human, right? And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't struggle to be better,
yeah,
right? Or struggle against the negative feelings, or of course you should and you will,
mhm,
but like anything that's said to you, you have to filter it through faith. Like, does Allah ask me to do this thing that that person asked me to do?
mhm,
If the answer is no, then they don't have a right to ask you that. It's just as simple as that. Is this like so? I mean, there was so many messages, but like,
yeah,
there's another like there's a verse in the Quran that I think about sometimes. فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَى. Remind if the reminder benefits. And it's so interesting to read that verse because you have people who come in and they impose themselves and they
mhm,
give you reminders, and the reminders might be true, right? Like all the things they say might be factually correct,
mhm,
but the moment in which they're saying them does not benefit you, it actually harms you,
yeah,
right? So you remind when the reminder is beneficial, right?
yeah,
So also understand that not everybody knows how to do that.
yeah,
Like people will come in and just be like, don't be sad. They'll be like, do this, do that, do this,
yeah,
move on, blah, blah, whatever it may be, whatever it may be.
mhm,
Oh, the move on one was a big one. The move on one was a big one. I feel like almost everybody who's been in a state of grief has probably heard this at some
mhm,
point or another.
yeah,
Move on. And that to me also is like extremely enraging.
mhm,
Like not even harmful. It's enraging because I'm like, but you don't exist in my body. You don't know what's going on inside. And so how can you tell me to move on when this is not your experience, right?
yeah,
Um, and each person gets to decide what they're moving forward. I say not moving
yeah,
on.
yeah,
Everybody gets decide what their moving forward looks like,
Yeah.
right? And again, I also always have to put the caveat that we don't want to exist in the shadow of pain all the time, right? Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful and he's going to bring joy into your life again and
Yeah.
make it beautiful and good things come, with hardship there's ease. Like we also have to acknowledge that piece and not just I'm going to move forward whenever I want and I'm just going to stay here, right? Stay
Yeah.
stay in like a dark place because that's also not healthy. But you still get to decide what that looks like for you as long as you're not saying or doing anything that's against the religion.
Yeah.
So like I'll give you another example of
Yeah.
like people used to say this to me all the time. A bunch of people, random people on the internet, like a lot of people.
Yeah.
Concept that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to replace what you lost with something better, right? And they would tell me that, and the concept is true. That's what I'm saying. Like I'm
Yeah.
not saying that it's factually incorrect. It's factually correct, but you're saying it to me in the context of your husband died and Allah's going to replace him with a better husband. That's and I'm telling you that is the context in which they're saying it. Like 100%. That's not me. That's not my interpretation of what they're saying. That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so you have to be careful about what you say to people when they're in that state of
Mhm.
grief, because the reality is what you say might actually push them away from faith, right? And so it's actually a huge responsibility when you're around somebody who's grieving
Yeah.
to be there for them in a way that is actually helpful,
Mhm.
in a way that fortifies their faith. And
Yeah.
I don't think you can really do that unless you actually know the person. And that's why I find it so strange when people message me online, people I don't know saying stuff like this. And I'm like, but you don't know me and you don't know whether your
Mhm.
reminder is benefiting me or actually harming me. So
Yeah.
why are you telling me that? Right. So, but if my sister came and told
Mhm.
me something, it would hit differently because
Yeah.
she knows me. She's literally been there for my whole life. Right. So
Yeah.
she understands my psychology. So,
Exactly.
like know who to advise,
Yeah.
when to advise them, and what to say. And if you don't know what to say, don't say anything. Just say, I'm so sorry, I'm here for you. Just, just be present with them. That's all
Yeah.
people need. That's all people need. And
That.
it's
Yeah.
and but also there's a
Mm.
diversity of people too. And if
Mm.
you know that person, hey, this reminder is actually going to help them at this
Yeah.
time. Right.
Yeah.
Um, so just yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if that answers your question. There's a lot
No, that
more.
did. And you know what? Even for me, like I can see it systematically now. It's like, so obviously, if I'm the person trying to console, I need to obviously make sure and just really think about, like, is that even my place, apart from like just a brief, consolation, but also, is it helpful? And if
Mm,
it's not, I like the filter you mentioned earlier, is whatever's coming in here, whatever people are saying to you, filter it through, yeah, but is this what Allah says to us? Is this what the religion wants from us, right? Like people might be saying it. And you're right, like, because this journey, like from grief and this whole healing journey, people move through these phases at whatever point they're ready to move to the next phase, move back, so on and so forth. So no one other than you gets to decide when that movement happens.
yeah.
And you might have those close to you that'll advise you when it should and so on and so forth. Jazakallah khair. I am going to ask you one last question, but before I do, guys, if people want to share their reflections in the chat, you can do that, and you can put in your questions into the Q&A. I'll just ask Asma one last question, and then we'll get started with all of your questions. Jazakallah khair. So this is now, let's think present you. If you could write an instruction manual for 2013 you that you would present to yourself at the start of the grieving process, what would be, say, the top two or three things you would want 2013 Asma to know about the nature of grief and just the healing journey? What is it that you wish you knew back then?
I'm gonna say the top thing
Yeah.
I would want, but the thing is, I don't even know if the 2013 version of me would accept those things.
Mm, yeah.
That's the tricky part, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because 10 years have passed.
Yeah.
right? Um, so I think the top thing for me that if I could say it in a way to her
Hmm.
where she could actually believe it,
Yeah.
is that things are going to get better. Like your grief, the intensity of the grief that you feel right now
Yeah.
going to be is going to get so much lighter, right? Because at that time, it was very hard for me to believe that it was ever going to get better. Like I was just convinced. I was convinced that this is my life now. That
Right.
the pain that I'm feeling every day, this is my life. And I just have to accept that I'm gonna live like just a very sad, dark um existence, right?
Yeah.
And um like all these years later, subhanAllah, like and obviously hindsight is 2020, right?
Hmm.
So I look back and I look at where I am right now and the way that my life has changed and where
Yeah.
I've landed and where I'm still going to land, inshallah, in the future.
Inshallah.
And it's just things are gonna get better.
Yeah.
They're gonna be easier.
SubhanAllah.
And
So
you
true.
and look for it. Like as painful as it is, make an effort to look for moments of joy. Make an effort to engage in things that make you happy to be alive,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know? Because when you're in that state, and I'm sure a lot of people in this webinar are have felt that when you're in
Hmm.
that state, it's like what I said about mankind being dead. Like just you feel like you're never gonna feel joy again. And
Yeah.
like, and if you do feel joy, how dare I feel joy? Like when XYZ happened. Like how
Yeah.
dare I? Right?
Yeah.
And when you said the top two things, actually that I would only say that one thing
Yeah.
because everything else I had to just go through, that I had to just
Mhm.
experience, or
Yeah.
else I wouldn't be at the stage,
Yeah.
right? And I think I would kind of I'm just imagining the 2013 version of me. Like I would just tell her to keep going, and it's
Um,
gonna get better. That's it.
um,
And if you truly believe in your heart that it's gonna get better,
yeah.
it will, because Allah promises with
Yeah.
heart, right? Life
Yeah.
is not just one thing,
Hmm.
many different things and many different emotions, and that's
Right.
okay. But it's almost as if I didn't want to accept the reality that life could be better because it
Right.
felt like a betrayal almost. Like
Yeah.
if I accept joy and happiness and laughter and all that, then I'm betraying that experience that I had, you know? It's
Yeah.
a strange place to be psychologically, but
It is.
things get better. Things get
They
better.
do.
The sun shines again in the sky. Um,
Yeah.
Laughter, joy, everything returns, you know?
It's like
You know?
enough Allah. Like it does. It does. Jazakallah khair. So we're going to move into the questions from the participants. I know there are a few people who've been raising hands. Guys, if you could just type your questions in the Q&A box, or even just the reflections, that would be helpful. I'll get started with what Q&A we have here, but those of you who've been raising hands, just be helpful if you put it in the Q&A box, inshallah. So I'll just pull that up over here. Um, I guess maybe I won't say the names. I'll just go with the questions. Okay, I think this is something that we kind of touched on, but I think it's important. So sister is saying, Salam, how do I forgive myself for the past? Is it true to say the past happened just like Allah wanted it to? It's my qadr and not my fault.
So I'm definitely not going to get into qada and qadar because
Okay,
I'm not qualified to speak about
okay,
that in any way,
right.
shape, or form.
Yeah.
Uh, Forgiving yourself is actually sometimes harder than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiving you. And
Mm,
that's what I have felt many times in my life.
yeah.
Uh, for what you say and do and the
Mm,
sins that you fall into,
yeah.
I felt that very deeply, that I can repent, but I
Yeah.
can't forgive myself.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I have to lord my sins over me in order for me to be repentant, or in order for me to not do them again in the future, or whatever it may be, whatever the psychology behind that is.
Mm,
The reality is that, like, Allah is going to forgive you. It's just a fact. Like, it's just a fact.
yeah.
So if you've done something and you make repentance, and in your heart
Mm,
you say, I'm not going to go back to that sin,
yeah.
done. You're actually done. And
Yeah.
that the only one who's holding it over you is yourself, right? And you can learn different dua for istighfar. One of my favorites is the Sayyid, it's called Sayyid al-Istighfar, like the
Right.
master of istighfar. And
Yeah.
I think if you say it once in the morning and then you die by the evening, you're automatically in paradise. If you say it at night and you don't live to the morning, everything is forgiven. It's one of those du'as that just everything is forgiven,
Just all.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so you guys can look it up.
Yeah.
But
It,
it's
the
really
heart.
easy to say
Mhm.
forgive yourself and very hard to internalize it. Very, very hard. Um, I don't know what advice to give except to keep learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how merciful He is and how He erases sins as if they never existed before. And yes, I agree with the questioner in the sense that everything that happened for a reason, and happened because you're human, and happened to teach you something.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that it was okay that you committed a sin. It doesn't mean that you should go back and commit that sin.
Yeah.
It just means that you are now more experienced as a human being, and you know
Yeah.
how to move forward in your life better. So
Yeah.
it's not an evil thing that you should lord over yourself. You should accept that
Right.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven you
Yeah.
and move forward with the wisdom and experience that that has given you.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Thank you. Our next question here is, which ayah is the one that says remind if the reminder benefits? Do we know, or what if we can maybe?
Can't remember. It's in Jazama. I
It's
can't
in
remember.
Juz Amma. I'm sure if I hate to say Google it, but I'm sure if we can find it quickly. If not, maybe I'll just we'll find
Yeah,
it.
if someone can just Google it quick and put it
Yeah,
in
and
the
just put it in the chat, maybe. Thank you. Okay,
inshallah.
Surah Al-A'la. Perfect. Jazakallah khair, Khadija. Okay, so our next question is, the question that bothers me the most is when someone asks, "How are you?" I don't know what to say to that.
Say the truth.
Mm,
Say, I'm not doing well. Say Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal. Like, you're grateful to Allah in every circumstance, right?
yeah,
Because we're taught to say that
yeah,
even if you're not doing well, it's still Alhamdulillah, right? In
yeah,
every sense.
yeah.
But I think we like to cover up how we're doing. We don't
Mm,
want to share with the world that we're not doing well, or that we're
yeah,
struggling, or whatever it
yeah,
is. I shouldn't say we, I'll say
yeah.
I, because as much as I've expressed online how
Mm,
I felt, it was actually very hard for me to express in person to people who are close to me how I was actually doing.
yeah,
Um, I wish that I had, and I wish that I had gone to therapy. I just want to mention that, right? I
yeah,
wish that if you have access to a good Muslim therapist, go.
yeah,
It's one
yeah.
of those things that I actually started therapy in 2022 and
Absolutely.
immediately regretted not doing it earlier,
Yeah,
because there's so many thought patterns that
mhm,
develop and that become ingrained in you.
yeah,
uh, if you have access to somebody who can actually help you sort through those feelings,
mhm.
um, like, you can deal with them early on and not carry them forward. I'm sorry, I got into a completely different
No, it's
thing,
helpful.
but tell people how you actually are,
Yeah,
that you're struggling and what are you struggling with, right? That doesn't make you weak. That doesn't make you anything.
yeah,
Comfortable telling them, right? It depends who's asking, right? If it's
yeah.
someone close to you,
Hmm.
we often think I shouldn't open up because I don't want to burden the other person.
Mm,
Um, Most of the time, that's just in your own head.
yeah,
If you actually express yourself to a person who is close to you and you feel safe expressing yourself to, it's not a burden on that person. It's a way to let them in so
mm,
that they can actually be there for you in the way that you need them to be there for you.
oh, I really like that. And I just wanted to add on to that. one of we did a session last year with Sheikh Naveed Aziz, and he was talking about the importance of accessing Muslim therapy. He did emphasize to make sure they are a practicing Muslim therapist and try to just dig a bit into their bio to make sure that they have the practice element, maybe not just culturally Muslim, because it's an important part when they're working through your psyche, so on and so forth. Jazakallah khair. Okay, next question. How do we know what works to process my grief?
You got to try a lot of different things.
Mm,
A lot of different things.
yeah.
That's why I mentioned a therapist, because somebody who's experienced will give you different things to do to actually
Mhm.
try it out. And if you don't have access to a therapist, there are many articles that you can read about like different things that you can try,
Yeah.
and just see what feels right and what feels
Yeah.
obviously within the confines of the faith,
Of
right?
course.
But one of the things that we should all be doing regardless
Mhm.
is reflecting on the Quran, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, this is healing for what's in the chest. So it's one of those things that everybody should be doing no matter what. And then what is extra beyond that that will help relieve some of that pressure or
Mhm.
whatnot, that's really up to you. When people are very social, maybe being in social situations and connecting with people you love, maybe that's something that's helpful to you. To other
Mhm.
people, it might be harmful, right?
Yeah.
It's just there's so many different things that you can do.
Yeah.
You just got to try everything.
Try it. Okay. And connecting to the Quran because it's a source of shifa. Jazakallah khair. Okay, so our next question is, so is it not, excuse me, so is it not beneficial to give people positive reminders when they're enveloped by negativity and they just can't see an alternative? There are times when I just want to be listened to, but people in my surroundings don't understand that. And I felt I do the same to others, but I want to avoid it and deal with it strategically. What would you advise to someone who wants to empathize without invalidating others' grief sentiments?
Make dua for that person instead of giving them a reminder.
Mm,
That's an interesting perspective to take. So if
yeah.
someone is expressing themselves to you and you want to give them a reminder, instead of saying you should XYZ because Allah says XYZ,
Hmm.
you make a dot for them. Just say, I hear what you're saying. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this so easy for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so merciful, and He's the only one who can uh really hold you and guide you through this pain. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I love
look at
that.
it from that perspective, right? Because then you're not telling the person you're wrong and you should be doing this, which I'm not saying it will never work, because there are people of different like sensibilities, right?
Hmm.
So it might work for some, but a lot of times when, like, if somebody expresses something to you and then
Hmm.
you confront them with something that is opposing to that, they will feel attacked,
Yeah,
especially because they were just very vulnerable to you.
right,
And so when somebody's vulnerable to you, you hold that. That is something that's sacred, right?
right.
That somebody trusted me with what's in their heart. And so I need to be very gentle.
Mm.
And the way that I find is really helpful is to make dot for that person in front of them.
Yeah,
And it's like, it's just so, it's
yeah.
just like, it always lands. It always
It
lands.
does, and it feels the other person feels like they've been heard.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're saying a dot like, may Allah, you know, like guide
Okay.
guide you out of your dumb thoughts. Like obviously you're not gonna go there, because that's
Right, right.
ridiculous.
Gentle, gentle.
You're gentle. You're gentle with people. And if the people around you aren't gentle with you, find people who are. Connect with people in groups like this. Find
Mhm.
people who will be understanding and gentle towards you so that it balances out what you're facing in
Yeah,
the other parts of your life.
thank you. Okay, next question. I'm not sure if it was mentioned or answered during the sessions. Sometimes someone's tongue says things in anger while they are grieving because people around them trigger them with their words, even though they don't know that they're triggering them and they don't realize that someone is grieving, going through a rough patch. How can the person move on from the incident and also try their best not to interact with such people? So
So
someone's triggered you and you've said some things in anger to them.
yeah.
Um, how do you like move
How
on
do you
and
move on from what though? From feeling
from
guilt
the
or
incident where you were triggered and then you said some maybe not nice things in anger? And then how do you also try to not interact with such people who trigger you?
So it kind of depends.
Mm,
It depends what the questioner is actually asking, right? So how do you move on from feeling guilty over the bad thing that you said? Or how do you move forward and repair the relationship with that person? Or,
mm.
you know what I mean? There are a lot of different perspectives to look at this question.
Yeah.
So I'm
Um,
just hesitant to answer any
okay. Yeah.
question asked.
I
Um,
think she just put it in the chat here. Yes, from the feeling
so
guilty and move forward and repair the relationship.
so the guilt thing is you're a human being. That's literally, that's it. You know, like when you read Surat Maryam,
Yeah.
she wished she was dead. She wished she was dead, even
Subhanallah.
though she knew the angel came to her and spoke to her, and she knew that this is what Allah wants from her. Like again, people who have access to the unseen in a way that we never did,
Mm,
or we never do, or
yeah.
we never will. And she
Yeah.
still said, "I wish I was dead." And that's the best woman who ever existed on this planet, past, present, future.
Wow.
So again, why are people holding themselves to standards that are beyond human?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying just it's a free for all and just say whatever you want because you're human, whatever. That's also
Yeah.
harmful. But
Yeah.
things come out that like
Mm,
we're human beings, right? And you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, and
yeah.
you have to make the effort to leave that in the past,
Yeah.
right? And then when it comes to repairing relationships, I feel like that's a whole other
Okay.
thing. And if whoever asked that, if they want to message me later on Instagram or something, we can
Okay,
chat.
yeah, definitely. Please do that. Okay. So next question. This is wrong, but I feel on my lowest days, how do you deal with a feeling like your loved one who passed wasn't protected by Allah?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And it feels, they weren't protected by Allah because they passed away. Is that what it is?
That's what it seems. The question seems to be. Yeah.
Um, I'll say something, but I don't know how to answer this question exactly, and I don't know
Okay.
if it's gonna be helpful or not.
Yeah.
But the way that I thought about this in early days when my husband was shot was that this is what was predestined for him. And he
Mhm,
was going to die at this very moment, whether it was out in the street having been shot or whether he was sleeping in his bed.
mhm,
And it's not up to me to decide when somebody I love is going to die. And it's not up to me to decide when I'm going to die. And there's a certain belief that I hold in my heart, or I try very hard to hold on to it, that Allah's mercy is so vast that He knows when to take the soul of a believer. If that person is somebody beloved to Him, He
mhm,
knows when to take the soul of that believer when they're in their best state. And it could be that, like, inshallah, it could be that your loved one was in the best state in their heart, so that when their soul is taken at that moment, they're in like the highest rank that than they would have ever been if they were taken at a later time, right? I always have to trace it back to Allah. Who is Allah? And if Allah is merciful in this kind of mercy that we can't even comprehend,
mhm.
it goes much deeper than what we can just see with our
Yeah.
eyes, right? So, do I wish in my heart that my husband wasn't shot? Of course I do. That's just the reality. So, me accepting that this happened and moving forward
Yeah.
doesn't mean that like my heart doesn't wish it didn't happen.
Mhm,
Even when I say, I trust that, he's a martyr in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was at his best state, and he died on a Friday, just all the things that are in my head, right?
mhm.
It's still like I still miss him, I still love him, I still wish it didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and these two things can exist at the same time, and just give yourself grace.
Yeah.
Give yourself grace.
Subhanallah. I love that. Um, I'm going to ask you one last question here before we wrap up. I really want to apologize to everyone. I know there's a lot of questions. I'm really sorry we couldn't get through all of them. But inshallah, we do plan to have more webinars in the future. And I'll give you some details about our next upcoming event right after this last question, inshallah. But I just want to apologize. I'm really sorry we weren't able to get through all of them. Okay, so how do I deal with not knowing the exact details, i.e., events, leading up to my husband's passing? He died suddenly and could have passed over 2 days. Because she doesn't know what happened and the details around it.
That's tough. That is tough because knowledge and clarity are two things that really help us in our grief, right? So when you don't have that clarity, whether it's about, what led up to it, or any other things surrounding, losing somebody, that is like an additional layer of grief, right? Um, there's something to be said about, I've actually been thinking about this a lot, that the stories that we have in this world don't always have the ending that is perfectly satisfying, that's just with like a bow, tied up with a bow,
Yeah.
right? Our stories, we don't get to decide how they
Mm.
end. We don't get to decide when they end and what the circumstances are going to be. We don't get to decide that. But I also like to think that the end, which is death, is not actually the end. There's something beyond that is actually the real life. This is how do you want to say, this is the prequel, this is the
Mm.
origin story. We have like that movie that's like this big movie, and then they
Oh, yeah.
produce another little movie that, oh, this is the origin story
Yeah,
of here.
right. Yeah,
This that's happening here, this is the origin story. That what's coming is life,
yeah.
right? What's coming is life. And so there's something to be said about disciplining the self,
Mm.
disciplining the soul, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I'm telling you that because I still struggle with it.
Oh,
Disciplining the soul into trusting Allah and knowing that even if you don't know, Allah
mm.
knows.
Oh,
And I'm not gonna lie, it's difficult. And it's another layer of grief to not have that clarity,
okay.
right? But at the end of the day, it always goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, always goes back to trusting that Allah is merciful and that He has the best interests of believers. He always has
Mhm.
their best interests in mind, that He's going to take their souls at the best time. Like lean into that tawakkul, lean into
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. I wanted to let you know that there were quite a few comments here just expressing appreciation for you and all your writing and your work. And what I did was I actually copied them and I'll try to send them to you after. So I think people would like you to, just read what they shared. Guys, again, I'm just so sorry not being able to get through all these questions, but inshallah, we will be having more webinars in the future. And I want to start with just reminding all of us that grief, it is a personal journey, but like we've been saying today, you don't have to do it alone. There's power in this community, there's power in healing. And um, I mentioned at the start of the talk, not everyone was signed in then yet, but just how Healing Together, it formed organically when a bunch of friends just decided to get together and just talk about the grieving process and help each other through it. So we will be doing an online session. We do them once a month. It's coming up on next Monday, January the 29th at 11:30 a.m. You will get an email if you've registered for the webinar, and also you can follow us on Instagram. It'll be posted there as well, and there will be a follow-up email coming. We just tell you a little bit about the Healing Together circles. It's a safe, secure space. Nothing is recorded. And the reason we don't record it is to create that intimate feel where you can just share freely and you don't even have to share. You can just come in to listen, learn from everyone else. But I do have to say, if you do find you want to share and talk, it's very cathartic. Like the first time I joined in, and I had no intention of sharing my story at all. I was just there in my head, what I thought was to be there more for other people. But even just sharing, talking about grief, which was almost 8, 9 years ago, it very cathartic. a lot of therapeutic value in that. So I do want to encourage you to attend. Also, because we do try to keep it intimate, there are limited spots. So if you do want to attend, please sign up early. The email will go out, and in the chat, I think the admin just posted the link. So you can definitely follow up over there. I also want to say, and Asma did not ask me to do this. This is literally just from my own experience. These two books of her are gold. Like there is really not too much out there where you can have a raw look into the grieving process with a proper Islamic filter and a lens. And I just found it very helpful. I think you on rukayasbookshelf.com, that's her publishing company, so you can get them there and definitely follow her on all her social media. Jazakallah khair. Thank you everyone for joining in today. Asma, thank you so much for, just really digging in deep with us and sharing so much that is helpful to us. Jazakallah khair.
Right.
Okay, thank you everyone. And inshallah, hopefully see you at a future Healing Together session or at one of the webinars. And maybe Asma, we can bring you back again for one of the webinars in the future, inshallah.
Mm.
Okay, all right, take care everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
So, don't forget to